candle burns in a darkened room. Its flame flickers, trembling, as if afraid of what's coming. Outside, thunder rolls over the French countryside. The year is 1880, and a woman, thin, pale, and marked by invisible wounds, opens her eyes. Her name is Marie-Julie Jahenny. The villagers call her the stigmatist of La Fraudize. For years, she has lived between two worlds, this one and another. In her small cottage near Blaine, she speaks of visions, of angels, of warnings whispered by heaven itself. Most think she's gone mad, but when her prophecies begin to unfold, famine, war, the rise and fall of nations, the laughter stops. She speaks of a future that chills even the faithful, of a time when darkness will cover the world, when even the candles of the righteous will struggle to burn, of a church divided, leaders in confusion, and a storm that will cleanse everything in its path. Her words are written down, hidden away, locked in drawers by priests who don't know what to make of them. And yet, she insists, the time will come when my words will be understood. That time, she said, would be the century of confusion, a time when truth would be mocked, faith forgotten, and the world would tremble before the dawn. Now, in 2025, her prophecies are being read again, and what they describe feels disturbingly familiar. This is a story of a woman who saw beyond her own century and warned what was coming for ours. February 12, 1850. The small village of Blaine, in the heart of rural France, wakes to the sound of church bells echoing across the frozen fields. In a modest farmhouse on the edge of town, a baby girl is born to poor but devout parents. They name her Marie-Julie Jahenny. The family has a few acres of thin soil, a stone fireplace that rarely stays lit, and a faith that sustains them through every season. The Loire countryside is harsh. Winters come early, and hunger often follows. But the Jahenny family's home is filled with prayer. Each night, her mother lights a candle before a small wooden crucifix and whispers, "May God keep us humble." Marie grows up barefoot in the fields, tending to animals, gathering firewood, helping her parents survive. By all accounts, she is quiet, obedient, and unusually gentle. Villagers remember her as a child who preferred silence to play, who spoke softly to the wind as if listening for something in return. When she's 12, illness strikes. Fevers come in waves, leaving her frail and pale. But her eyes, always calm, seem to see past her pain. Her family fears she won't survive. The local priest visits often, praying beside her bed, expecting her to fade. But she recovers slowly, inexplicably. Her mother calls it grace. Her father calls it stubbornness. Life continues. The years pass quietly. France is changing, revolutions, wars, and the slow fading of faith across Europe. But in Blaine, the world still moves at the pace of a prayer. By her early 20s, Marie works as a seamstress, mending clothes for families who can barely afford bread. She spends her days at a small wooden table, hands moving with rhythm and purpose, the rosary always beside her. The people of Blaine see her as a simple country girl. She attends Mass daily, kneels for hours in prayer, often fasting longer than her health can bear. She gives away most of what she earns, and yet, those closest to her begin to notice something unusual. The way she speaks about heaven, as if it were near, the way her expression changes during prayer, the way she sometimes whispers, "He is here." In 1873, everything changes. It begins on an ordinary evening. The sky is heavy with rain, the village quiet. Marie is kneeling before a crucifix in her small bedroom. A single candle burns beside her. As she prays, the flame flickers violently, then steadies. The room fills with light. Not sunlight, not firelight, something softer, purer. She looks up. The figure on the cross glows faintly, the wounds radiant like jewels. A voice clear, masculine, filled with gentleness and sorrow speaks her name. Marie-Julie, my child, you will suffer for souls. She cannot move. The air feels alive, trembling with unseen presence. The voice continues. You will bear the marks of my passion. Through you, I will speak to a world that has forgotten me. And then the light fades. When she wakes, she is on the floor, trembling. Her hands ache, her feet sting. She looks down and sees the faint outline of wounds, small circles pressed into her skin, as if burned from within. She tells no one, not yet. For days, she hides her hands beneath cloth, terrified of what people will think. But the pain grows worse, the marks deeper. One morning, her mother sees the blood seeping through the bandages and screams. Within hours, the parish priest arrives. He examines the wounds, says nothing, and calls for another priest. Soon half the village gathers outside the Jahenny home, whispering prayers and rumors. Some believe it's divine. Others whisper witchcraft. That evening, as the priest anoints her hands, Marie loses consciousness. Witnesses later describe what they saw: her body lifting slightly from the bed, her eyes open but unseeing, her lips moving in silent prayer. For 3 hours she remains like that, unresponsive, her body bearing the wounds of Christ. When she finally breathes again, she whispers, "He showed me his cross." It is the beginning of her life, as a stigmatist, one of the few in history to bear the physical wounds of Christ's passion. News spreads quickly. Priests, doctors, skeptics, and believers travel to Blaine to see her. Some test her, others mock her. The church begins quiet investigations, cautious but curious. Yet through it all, Marie remains humble, insisting she is nothing. "I am only a needle," she tells one priest, "and the thread is his will." The wound marks deepen. The visions return. And with them come messages, prophecies of suffering, of warning, of light and darkness intertwined. But before the world hears her words, before the papers call her the mystic of France, she will spend years hidden, enduring pain that no one else can see. Because for Marie-Julie Jahenny, the miracles are only beginning. The year is 1873, and the quiet village of Blaine will never be the same again. Marie-Julie Jahenny's wounds have deepened. The bleeding appears every week, always on the same days, often accompanied by fainting or seizures that doctors cannot explain. Word spreads quickly across the countryside, the girl who bleeds with Christ. Curious pilgrims begin to arrive, walking miles to see her small home at La Fraudize, the hamlet where she now lives with her family. At first, she hides from them. She doesn't seek fame, she doesn't want crowds. But the church sends investigators. Priests come quietly, notebook in hand, standing beside her as she prays. Some leave shaken, others leave unconvinced, but none can deny what they see. During her ecstasies, witnesses describe her face-changing eyes fixed on something beyond this world, her body frozen, her breathing shallow, her voice soft but clear. She speaks to someone unseen, answering questions no one else hears. Doctors test her reflexes. They prick her skin, move bright lights before her eyes. No response. Her pulse slows to almost nothing, yet she lives. Each time she wakes, she remembers everything she has seen. She speaks of Christ wounded, sorrowful, yet radiant. She speaks of the Virgin Mary, who comforts her in her pain. And then she begins to speak of visions, images of things that have not yet come to pass. One priest, Father David, records her words. In his journals, he writes, "Her voice was not her own. It was as if heaven itself borrowed her tongue." He describes scenes that no one can understand. Flames sweeping across cities, People wandering in darkness. Churches empty, abandoned. Nations at war. And always, she says, a message, a warning from heaven for those who will listen. The world, she whispers during one trance, is running toward the edge of a great night. And when that night falls, faith will be the only light left. They call her condition religious hysteria. But then they see her wounds reopen before their eyes, bleeding without injury, closing again without scars. One doctor, Dr. Imbert Gerbier, a man known for debunking supposed miracles, becomes one of her most dedicated defenders. He writes in his report, "What I have seen cannot be explained by science. It is not trickery. It is something else entirely." The local bishop, cautious, orders all further phenomena to be documented. He forbids Marie-Julie from speaking publicly. She obeys. Every word she says, every vision she describes, is now written down, sealed, and sent to ecclesiastical archives. She suffers quietly. Weeks go by where she cannot eat or drink. Her only nourishment, witnesses claim, is the Eucharist. When she receives communion, the bleeding stops for a few hours. Her face glows with peace. Then the pain returns, and she whispers through tears. Suffering is the language heaven uses to speak to souls. Her family's home becomes a place of pilgrimage. Hundreds visit. The poor bring flowers, the sick bring prayers, and the curious bring questions. They leave changed. Many swear they've seen her wounds shine faintly in the candlelight. Others claim to have smelled roses when the bleeding began. But not everyone believes. In nearby villages, priests warn their parishioners to be careful. Even the devil can mimic holiness, one sermon declares. Some locals mock her openly. They call her the Saint of Shadows. Marie-Julie never defends herself. "If my pain gives glory to God," she says, "then let them speak." In 1875, her ecstasies become more frequent. The messages grow darker. She speaks of France, a nation once Catholic, now drifting away from faith. She speaks of priests losing courage, of churches being closed, of times when evil will wear the robes of virtue. Her confessor writes down everything. The pages fill with warnings that sound more like poetry than prophecy. When shepherds sleep, wolves will enter the fold. When the altars are silent, the heavens will weep blood. These words spread quietly through the countryside, copied by hand and shared among the faithful. Some believe she is a prophet sent to warn France. Others fear her words will bring trouble. The church keeps its distance, neither condemning nor approving. For decades, it will remain cautious, watching her life unfold. But even the cautious begin to admit that something extraordinary is happening in La Fraudaise. By the late 1870s, her reputation reaches Paris. Articles call her the living passion of Christ. Pilgrims travel from across Europe. Soldiers, nuns, farmers, even skeptics all come to see the woman said to carry the wounds of Calvary in her hands. Yet through all of it, Marie-Julie remains the same humble, quiet, almost shy. When asked if she is a saint, she laughs softly. "No," she says, "I am only his servant, and his servant's cross is heavy." As her fame grows, so does the mystery. Her wounds still open every Friday. Her health fades, yet she never dies. Doctors call it impossible. Priests call it miraculous. And in the stillness of her suffering, her visions begin to turn outward, no longer only about France, but about the world. She sees storms. She sees kingdoms falling. She sees the church herself walking through fire. It is from these later ecstasies that her most haunting prophecies will come warnings for centuries she will never live to see. And among them lies a message marked for a time far beyond her own. a time she calls the century of confusion. By the late 1870s, Marie-Julie Jahenny's small home at La Fraudi's had become both a pilgrimage site and a mystery. Every Friday, her family prepared the room where the stigmatist would fall into ecstasy, her hands bleeding, her voice speaking words that no one else could hear. Outside, peasants gathered in silence, clutching rosaries. Soldiers from nearby garrisons came to watch, removing their caps. The church continued to observe cautiously, sending priests to record her words, but forbidding them to publish what they heard. Those who attended described the same haunting scene. The air seemed to grow heavy before each trance. A faint fragrance, like roses after rain, filled the room. Then Marie-Julie would stiffen, her eyes fixed on the crucifix. Her voice, weak and tremulous at first, would become clear, melodic, almost not her own. She would speak of what she saw. One afternoon in 1877, she described a vision that left even the priests trembling. "I saw," she whispered, "a world covered in smoke, cities burning, the sea rising over the land, men crying out but hearing no answer. The earth was breaking." The priest beside her asked what it meant. Her reply was quiet. "It is not the end. It is a cleansing." Her notebooks, or rather, the notebooks of those who transcribed her words, soon filled with hundreds of such warnings. Some were personal, calls for repentance, patience, faith. Others were cosmic. "A great darkness will come upon the world," she said, "and in that darkness only faith will shine." It was the first time she spoke of what would later become her most famous and misunderstood prophecy, the 3 days of darkness. She described it not as punishment, but as purification, a time when all human arrogance would be silenced, when only prayer and mercy could protect souls. "The air will be poisoned," she said during one vision. "The sky will turn black, and the earth will tremble. Only blessed candles will give light, and those who pray will not perish." These words were copied and circulated in secret. They spread from parish to parish, carried by priests who believed they were too important to remain hidden. But the higher authorities hesitated. The Bishop of Nantes, cautious and weary of fanaticism, ordered silence. "No more of these prophecies," he wrote. "Heaven does not speak in such fearful tones." Marie-Julie obeyed, at least outwardly. But the visions continued, and she kept speaking to those who would listen privately, to the small circle of priests and faithful who gathered quietly in her cottage. She warned them of things beyond their imagination. She saw wars unlike any the world had yet known, a war of nations, then a war of minds. She saw inventions that seemed impossible in her time. "I see," she said in 1881, "machines in the air that spit fire upon cities. I see great metal birds that roar louder than storms." Her listeners could not fathom such things. Yet decades later, as the world witnessed bombers over Europe and cities reduced to ash, her words would echo again. She spoke also of the church, not of its destruction, but of its suffering. "The church will be eclipsed," she said, "and for a time, the faithful will see nothing but shadow. A time will come when those who should speak will remain silent, and those who should remain silent will speak." Priests wrote these words down carefully, then locked the pages away. Some feared them. Others recognized their truth even then. The late 19th century had seen France turn bitterly against religion, churches closed, priests mocked, faith treated as superstition. For a poor village mystic to speak of a spiritual eclipse felt dangerously prophetic. Through all this, Marie-Julie's suffering grew. Her wounds reopened daily now. Her body wasted away. For months, she could not eat solid food, yet she continued to live, sustained only by the Eucharist. those who saw her began to call her the living host. Her voice, however, never lost its strength. In her ecstasies, she spoke of hope as often as of warning. After the storm, she said, will come the dawn. After the tears, the light. But first must come the trial. The messages multiplied visions of false shepherds, of faith under siege, of a world where morality would be mocked as weakness. One of her later prophecies reads, when men no longer blush for sin, and women seek to be like men, when truth is replaced by opinion, and prayer by noise, then the hour of purification will be near. She said the confusion would begin in the century of light and machines, but its peak would come in the century of confusion. Her followers took that to mean long after her death, an age when humanity, surrounded by inventions, would forget its soul. Many see that description fitting perfectly with the modern world. Technology replacing faith, constant noise drowning silence, truth becoming whatever pleases the moment. It is not that she named a year. It is that her words describe an era, one that feels uncomfortably like now. In 1883, a priest asked her during an ecstasy, when will these things begin? She answered slowly, when the world no longer knows what it is, when nations rise without fathers and children walk without light, then the words will awaken. He wrote it down. Beneath it, he added one line, this is for another time. By the turn of the century, her health had collapsed completely. She could no longer walk, could barely see, yet her voice in ecstasy remained steady. Her visions continued until her death in 1941. Afterward, her notebooks were gathered and stored by the faithful, some preserved in church archives, others kept hidden in private collections. What she left behind was not a timetable, but a pattern, a series of warnings that, for generations, seemed distant. Until now. Today, in 2025, her descriptions feel less like poetry and more like memory written ahead of time. A divided church, nations trembling, moral confusion, disasters natural and man-made. The century of confusion she foresaw has arrived. When the last candle flickers, she said, another will be lit. Heaven will not abandon the earth. By the end of the 19th century, Marie-Julie Jahenny's name was known far beyond the borders of France. Priests and scholars, some fascinated, some fearful, had begun collecting her messages not as dogma, but as a record of something extraordinary. Most of these writings remained hidden, passed between bishops and theologians in sealed envelopes. But a few escaped, whispered through the countryside by pilgrims who believed that heaven was warning not just France, but the entire world. Her visions began to widen. They no longer concerned only her homeland or the church. They spanned oceans, continents, and centuries yet to come. One Friday in 1880, witnesses recorded her voice, speaking in a whisper that carried through the small room. The earth will tremble under the weight of its own sins. The nations will rise against one another. The proud will devour the proud. The hands that build will become the hands that destroy. At first, listeners assumed she spoke of France, still reeling from revolutions, still scarred by war. But as the years passed, her words began to sound like history unfolding in slow motion. She spoke of a great red storm from the east, spreading its shadow across the world. From the lands of the north, she said, will come a wind that extinguishes prayer. It will promise equality, but bring chains. It will offer bread, but take away freedom. Her followers later saw in these words a clear reference to communism, decades before the Bolshevik Revolution. The imagery fits with unsettling precision. A red wave, born in the north, spreading through nations with promises of salvation while silencing faith. But her warnings did not stop there. She turned her gaze toward Rome, the heart of the church. In one vision, she saw the eternal city surrounded by turmoil. "I see," she said, "Rome trembling as thunder rolls in the heavens. I see two councils, one of light, one of shadow. The shepherds argue while the wolves gather at the gate." It was a prophecy not of destruction, but of confusion, a church divided within itself, faithful clergy suffering as doctrines were twisted and reinterpreted. She spoke of an eclipse of the church, a time when truth would seem hidden and silence would be mistaken for peace. "There will come," she said, "a counterfeit church, shining on the outside but hollow within. Many will follow it, thinking they serve God. Only those who cling to the cross will recognize the difference." Her listeners wept. Some begged her to stop speaking, unable to bear the images she described. But she continued, her eyes distant, her tone soft, as if she were simply repeating what had been shown to her. "The church will rise again," she added, "but only after it has been crucified." In other ecstasies, she saw France itself, her beloved homeland, at the center of both suffering and renewal. She called it the eldest daughter of the church, destined to endure humiliation before rediscovering its mission. "France will fall to her knees," she said. "Her altars will be profaned, her priests scattered. But from her ashes will come a light that will heal the nations." Many dismissed such words as patriotic mysticism. Yet, when the First World War erupted in 1914, when churches were turned into hospitals and battlefields scarred the soil of Europe, believers remembered her warnings. And when a second, even greater war followed a generation later, her writings were read again, this time with trembling hands. In one note preserved by her confessor, she described cities falling in a single instant and fire falling from the sky. At the time, no one could imagine such destruction. Decades later, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, her words resurfaced in books and sermons, eerie, sorrowful echoes of a reality she had somehow seen. But Marie-Julie's visions went beyond the wars of men. She foresaw the restlessness of the earth itself. "The mountains will roar," she said. "The seas will leave their boundaries, and the air will carry sickness like breath." She described floods, earthquakes, storms greater than any before, and times when the seasons themselves would rebel. "Winter will come in summer, and summer will bring frost. The earth will groan like a living creature." Her followers copied those lines by hand, but even they could not imagine a world where the climate itself seemed to unravel. Today, those words feel less like metaphor and more like observation. And then there was her prophecy of the century of confusion, her most mysterious message of all. At the time, light across the stars sounded poetic, impossible. But to the modern ear, it reads like the language of satellites, instant communication, and screens glowing across every continent. Her phrase, "When the world is full of light but cannot see," resonates almost painfully in our digital age, an age where information floods every moment, yet wisdom feels absent. She said that this confusion would not destroy humanity, but purify it. "The Lord will let the storm rage," she warned, "until hearts remember how to love again." When she spoke of the United States, her tone changed. She called it a nation of strength and sorrow. She saw its rise as a beacon of light, then its temptation to pride and division. "A great people," she said, "will bless the world with charity, then wound themselves with discord. Their riches will not protect them. Their towers will tremble, and only their faith will save them." Many later pointed to those lines after September 11, 2001, when towers did indeed fall. Others see them now, in 2025, as describing a world of anxiety, social fracture, and moral exhaustion, a civilization powerful, but restless, searching for meaning amid noise. Marie-Julie's prophecies were not dated, not precise, but timeless patterns of warning and hope. They read less like fortune-telling and more like divine psychology, an anatomy of the human soul across centuries. Every line carries both judgment and mercy, and always she returned to the same refrain. Heaven allows the storm, but heaven never abandons the earth. Her followers would later collect her words into a single message that has outlived every empire and ideology she predicted. When the world forgets God, He does not forget the world. That perhaps is why her voice still matters, because in the midst of technology, division, and doubt, she still reminds us that prophecy was never meant to terrify, but to awaken. And the century of confusion she described it has come. But so too, she promised, will come the renewal. Among all of Marie-Julie Jahenny's visions, none has stirred more awe, fear, or fascination than what she called the Great Darkness. To her, it was not a myth or a metaphor. It was an event she saw again and again, described with such precision that even her confessors grew silent while writing down her words. It began, she said, as an ordinary day. The sky was gray, heavy, the wind still. Then the sun dimmed, as if veiled by smoke. The light faded slowly until only shadows remained. Birds stopped singing. Animals hid. The air turned thick, almost alive with dread. Then came night, not the night of nature, but a darkness that moved like a living thing. For 3 days, she said, the sun will not rise, nor the moon give light. The air will be poisoned. The earth will groan. Only blessed candles will give light, and they will burn only in the homes of the faithful. Witnesses recorded her describing it in a trembling voice, tears running down her face. The demons will be loosed upon the world, she said. They will howl through the air like storms. The windows must be closed, for their cries will drive men to madness. She warned that no one should look outside during those 3 days. Curiosity will destroy many, she said. The faithful must remain in prayer. Only faith will protect them. Only the light of grace will remain. Her listeners sat in silence. Some crossed themselves, others wept. The priests who transcribed her words called it a vision beyond human comprehension. To skeptics, it was terror in poetry. To believers, it was a solemn warning. But for Marie-Julie, it was not meant to inspire fear. Do not be afraid, she told those around her. The darkness is not the end. It is the beginning of mercy. In later ecstasies, she gave more detail. The sky will turn red before the darkness falls, she said. The thunder will shake the earth without ceasing. All those who mock God will perish in the silence. The earth will be washed, not with water, but with tears. Her confessor asked her what people should do. She answered simply, pray, prepare, keep the blessed candles ready, for they will be the sign of faith. Throughout her life, Marie-Julie kept one such candle on her bedside table. It burned during her ecstasies, a small flame flickering against the shadows. She called it the light of the soul. The prophecy spread quickly. By the early 20th century, pamphlets circulated across France describing the 3 days of darkness in detail. The church never condemned the devotion, but neither did it endorse it officially. Bishops preferred silence, the faithful preferred preparation. In homes across Europe, people kept beeswax candles blessed by priests, just in case. Even decades later, during the World Wars, when bombs fell and skies turned black with smoke, some remembered her words. Many thought the prophecy was being fulfilled. But the true darkness she described was deeper than weather or war. Marie-Julie insisted, that the event would come only after the world had lost its sense of sin, when even believers would doubt. It will come when men no longer know how to blush, she said, when even the innocent will be tempted to despair, when the church will seem dead and the shepherds scattered. To some, those words sound alarmingly close to the present day, an age when confusion reigns, when faith often feels fragile, and when the world seems both enlightened and lost. And yet, she always returned to hope. After the darkness, she said, the dawn will be more beautiful than before. The earth will be purified. The air will be healed. The church will rise renewed, shining brighter than ever. She saw a world emerging from the darkness, transformed, a humanity humbled, stripped of pride, ready to begin again. Those who survive, she said, will sing a new song. They will rebuild what was destroyed. They will understand why they were saved. For her, the prophecy was not about annihilation, but about renewal, divine surgery on a wounded world. The symbolic depth of her vision cannot be missed. The 3 days mirror the 3 days Christ spent in the tomb, a universal night before resurrection. The extinguished sun recalls Calvary. The blessed candles represent faith, enduring when everything else fails. That dual meaning explains why her message endures. It speaks not just to apocalyptic fear, but to every dark night of the soul. Every time a believer keeps faith through despair, a candle burns in that darkness. Modern interpreters see uncanny parallels between her imagery and our own world. Skies filled with smoke from wildfires, power grids failing, silence in cities that never sleep. The poisoned air she described could be read as pollution, or the spiritual suffocation of a society drowning in noise and distraction. And her warning about curiosity, do not look outside, feels almost prophetic in an age where endless screens pull our eyes away from inner reflection. Perhaps, they say, her darkness is not literal, but spiritual, a time when humanity is cut off from the light of truth, waiting for grace to return. Whatever the interpretation, her message remains clear. Fear will not save us. Faith will. Keep your homes in peace, she said. Pray, love, forgive. When the night comes, heaven will remember its own. No, she said, because he promised the candle of faith will never go out. To this day, the prophecy of the 3 days of darkness remains one of the most discussed and misunderstood revelations in Christian mysticism. For some, it is literal. For others, it is allegory. But for all who read her words, it is a mirror, a reflection of how fragile, and yet how unbreakable, faith can be when the world grows dark. And Marie-Julie's candle still burns, not in her small room at La Fraudi's, but in the hearts of those who still believe that light is strongest when night is deepest. By the end of her life, Marie-Julie Jahenny no longer spoke about kings or nations. Her visions turned toward something much closer to her heart, the church she loved, served, and suffered for. Her voice, usually calm, trembled. The danger will come from within, she said. It will not be the swords of enemies that wound the church, but the hands of her own children. The room fell silent. Those present, priests, nuns, simple villagers, exchanged anxious glances. For them, the church was unshakable, the rock on which the world stood. But Marie-Julie spoke of shadows that would one day creep inside its walls. There will be 2 churches, she said. One born of man, brilliant and adorned, speaking of love but forgetting truth. And another, silent and hidden, born of the cross, clinging to faith while the world mocks it. Her confessor asked if she meant a schism, but she shook her head weakly. It will not be a division of place, she whispered, but of hearts. The true and the false will stand side by side, and only prayer will tell them apart. Those who recorded her words described her face as serene, not angry. There was no bitterness in her warnings, only sadness, the sorrow of a mother watching her children drift from home. She foresaw a time when even the faithful would be confused. "The shepherds will quarrel among themselves," she said, "while the wolves circle the fold. Many good priests will weep, for they will be silenced. Many others will speak too loudly, yet say nothing of God." She spoke of an eclipse, a mysterious shadow that would cover the church, but not destroy it. "The church will be eclipsed," she repeated, "but not defeated. When the light returns, it will shine brighter than before." To those who heard her, it sounded like metaphor. But to later generations, her words began to sound eerily literal. She seemed to describe an age when confusion would reign, when moral clarity would fade, when the voice of truth would be drowned out by endless noise, an age that feels all too familiar. One of her most striking messages came in 1880. "When the pastors leave the altar, when the faithful grow weary of prayer, when new laws mock the commandments, then the trial will begin. But heaven watches. The heart of the church still beats, even when her voice is faint." Her words, written in faded ink by trembling hands, feel prophetic not because they predict headlines, but because they read like a diagnosis of the soul. She saw not politics, but hearts, the human tendency to replace faith with comfort, sacrifice with ease, truth with convenience. In her final years, Marie-Julie could no longer stand. Her body was frail, her voice barely a whisper, yet her mind remained sharp. She prayed constantly for priests, especially for those who struggled with doubt. "The cross is heavy," she told one visiting seminarian, "but if you drop it, it crushes someone else." During one of her last recorded ecstasies, she described a vision of the church as a great ship on a stormy sea. The waves crashed against its hull, lightning split the sky, and the crew ran in panic. At the helm stood a captain, tired, wounded, but still steering. Around him, mutiny brewed, yet the ship never sank. "The mast will break," she said softly, "but the cross will hold." For her, that image was everything. The church was not a building, nor an institution alone. It was the vessel of souls, battered but guided. The storm was inevitable, but so was salvation. "There will remain a small number," she said, "a flock without pride, despised by the world. But through them, the church will survive." These words gave hope to those who feared her darker prophecies. August 4th, 1941. The house at La Fraudi's is quiet. The war rages across Europe, but in her small room, peace reigns. Marie-Julie Jahenny lies in her bed, her crucifix resting on her chest, her candle still burning beside her. Her eyes close for the last time. Outside, the fields of Blaine shimmer in late summer light. She dies as she lived, poor, humble, and filled with faith. In the decades that followed, her name faded into obscurity. The world she tried to warn moved on, faster and louder, just as she said it would. But her words remained buried in archives, whispered by pilgrims, rediscovered in times of crisis. Today, in 2025, her voice sounds clearer than ever. Not because the world is ending, but because it is aching to begin again. Marie-Julie Jahenny's message was never about fear. It was about hope that refuses to die, the hope that survives every war, every darkness, every silence. That candle still burns. It burns in the heart of every believer who refuses to despair. It burns in every act of kindness, every quiet prayer, every moment of courage when the world chooses love over hate. It burns in the church, wounded but alive. It burns in those who still look up to heaven and whisper, "Lord, let the dawn come." And perhaps, just perhaps, that dawn, the one she saw so long ago, is closer than we think. Fade out. Candlelight flickers. Wind whispers through the fields of Blaine, and a voice echoes softly across the centuries. After the storm, peace. After the night, light. After death, life. The cross will triumph, and heaven will not forget.